Hello and welcome to Lecture 3 in the course Language and Communication. Today I'm going to talk about levels of language analysis and I'm going to talk about the concept of communicative competence. Now, language can be studied at different levels, and knowledge of these levels can be useful when we want to employ language in professional settings. And language can be, or communication can be divided into two major categories, namely verbal communication and non-verbal communication. And verbal communication can be then subdivided into written communication and oral communication. If we restrict our discussion here to verbal communication, we'll find that a typical way of analysing language level is a 5-point categorization. At the lowest level, we find the study of sounds, also referred to as phonology. At the next level, we find the study of words, also referred to as morphology. On the level above that one, we find the study of sentences, or syntax. And above that one again, we find the study of meaning. And finally, in this categorization, we have the study of pragmatics, the study of language in context. Now in this lecture I'm going to focus on the fourth and the fifth level, namely semantics and pragmatics. But before I do that, I'll just briefly introduce to you some examples of phonology, morphology and syntax, and how this can be relevant for students of language and language teachers. Now if we take this word here, from experience we know that this is a word which many students find it difficult to pronounce. Now you can take three seconds to think about how you will pronounce, or how you would pronounce this word. Difficult? Yeah, it probably is. And the reason is that there is a discrepancy or a difference between the way the word is written, the spelling, and the way the word is pronounced. But if we know something about how symbols are transcribed, or how words can be transcribed in terms of the pronunciation, this can help us to find the correct pronunciation of different words. So if we take this word here, which is pronounced hierarchical, we can go to a pronouncing dictionary to see how it is pronounced. Moreover, this can be useful when we practice pronunciation in general, because if we can get from a level where we think about the spelling to a level where we think about pronunciation and how the symbols are to be pronounced, this may help us pronounce words more correctly, and is useful in a language learning perspective. Then we can go and have a look at an example of morphology. I picked for you today a rather extreme example, but an example which shows quite well how word elements or morphs are put together into words. The example here is a bit of a tongue twister: anti-disestablishmentarianism. So if you get bored one evening, you can sit down and practice the pronunciation of this word. No, I'm joking, but the important thing is that this is a good example showing how morphs build words. The key here, or the core here, is the morph establish. And then, as you can see, there are a number of prefixes. Anti and dis are prefixes. They precede their core. And then there are a number of suffixes following the word. Establishment, establishmentarian, establishmentarianism, and then disestablishmentarianism and anti-disestablishmentarianism. So adding a lot of words to form, a lot of morphs to form a word. Finally, an example of syntax. I picked for you the rather ambiguous sentence. She hit the man with a stick. And when I say ambiguous, it means that the word has more than one meaning. And if you analyse the sentence, you may be able to see that the sentence means, or can mean, firstly, that the woman or the girl, she used a stick to hit the man with. Or it can mean she hit the man who was carrying the stick. So if you know syntactic analysis, sentence analysis, you will be able to see that the man and with the stick can be two different elements. The man and with a stick, it can either be two different elements or it can be one element. In the first interpretation, she used a man to hit the stick with. Then the man and with the stick are two different elements, two different constituents. So with the stick, if you analyse it, would be an adverbial denoting instrument. She was using a stick to hit the man with. In the second interpretation, the man and with a stick is one element. So she hit the man who was carrying a stick. The man with a stick who was carrying a stick is one element. And when you start doing syntactic analysis, you could, for example, replace this constituent, you can replace this element with a pronoun. She hit him. She hit him. So, but the pointer is, if you know something about syntactic analysis, you may be better able to spot such ambiguities. So, I said that I was going to devote most of this lecture to meaning and language in use, or semantics and pragmatics. If we start with meaning. Some time ago I had a discussion with two students on the meaning of the word blunt. B-L-U-N-T, blunt. And one of the students said, well, blunt means, well, one of the meanings of blunt is to be frank, to be honest, to say what you think in a straightforward way. And the other student said, no, it means, to be blunt means that you are direct but in a clumsy way, that you say things in a clumsy manner that may offend people. Okay, so we were discussing this back and forth, and then one of them said, okay, you just check the dictionaries to see that I'm right. And then we looked this up in a dictionary, and we found that the Cambridge American English Online Dictionary said that blunt means 1, direct in speech, and 2, saying what you think without trying to be polite, or saying what you think without caring about other people's feelings. So you are direct in a somewhat negative way. And then there is another dictionary saying that blunt can mean brusque, when rejecting people. You say, no, I don't want this, sort of in a very brusque way. Or it can mean brief and direct. And in addition to this, blunt may of course mean not sharp, as in a blunt knife, a rounded knife, or not sharp knife. But the point here is that there are different applications of meaning, and this is what we're trying to point out here. First of all, we can look at meaning in a conceptual way. Conceptual meaning will be the meaning that is found in dictionaries. We can go to a dictionary to see how words are explained. The problematic thing is, of course, that sometimes words are explained differently in different dictionaries. This makes this complicated. Then, in addition to conceptual meaning, is what we call associative meaning. This is the meaning that individuals apply. Like in this case, the two students had two different notions of the word blunt. In lecture 1, I gave you an example of different associations of the word mountain. So again, there are differences in notions of what words mean. And to put it in a theoretical way, you could talk about intended meaning. That is the meaning which the speaker or the writer puts into it. And secondly, there is interpreted meaning, which is the meaning that the listener or the reader applies. And this is back to where we started in lecture 1, that communication is very often about the negotiation of meaning. And it's important to be aware of this, because you cannot take for granted that the way you think about a specific word is the way that other people think about a specific word. And if you look at legal contracts, that's quite interesting as an example. Legal contracts very often have a very detailed introduction to explain what different words mean. For example, in this contract, the customer means, and then blah, 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 and the seller or the vendor means blah, 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 blah. And the contract is to run for such and such an amount of time, and it goes on to specify in detail what the different words are supposed to mean. Okay, in addition to conceptual and associative meaning, we may also talk about thematic meaning, which is meaning related to emphasis. And in writing, this could be exemplified with the use of active and passive sentences. One example, a rather simple, banal example, would be the difference between the cat killed the mouse and the mouse was killed by the cat. So the cat killed the mouse and the mouse was killed by the cat. The sentences basically mean the same, but the emphasis is different. In the first sentence, the focus or the emphasis is more on the fact that it was the cat which killed the mouse. More focus on the cat. And the second one, there is more focus on the mouse and the fact that the mouse was killed. And such emphasis can also be relevant when you want to avoid being too direct. Just as an example, which Locker and Kaczmarek use, if you want to avoid being too direct and to offend people, you could use passive constructions. One example, if I remember correctly, is the sentence from business then. You failed to sign the check. You failed to sign the check. Now this sort of could be interpreted as a bit offensive, in the sense that there is a focus on you and failure. You failed to sign the check. So in order to be a little bit more soft in your approach, you could use a passive construction, saying the check was not signed. The check was not signed. So you have different emphasis, taking away the focus from the failure of signing the check. This is something that you can also use with students and with parents. Rather than focusing on saying to a student, for example, your essay lacks a good structure. Rather than saying that, you say the essay lacks a good structure. So there's a way of taking away the focus from the reader and the failure. Okay, then about pragmatics. Pragmatics has to do with style. Now, if you look at these two sentences here, it ain't much sense in what you're saying. And the point of view voiced here could be questioned. Now, these two sentences could be said to basically contain the same message. It could be the same message. But the first one is more informal, using phrases such as ain't. Ain't is informal. You can see your is more informal in the sense that it is a contraction. Contractions are typically more informal. And also that the words are more high frequent, meaning that they are used more on a daily basis, being more informal. Conversely, you can see here the point of view voiced. Voiced is more formal way of saying, well, say. Could be questions. These are phrases which are more formal. And if you look at this again, you'll see that this is a passive construction. The point of view could be questioned by me, for example. So the point of view voiced here by whom? Well, voiced here by you. So what you are saying could be questioned. It could be questioned means that I don't think this is very true, or this is a very good point. So this is about pragmatics. It depends on how you put the words together to convey your message. This one, informal and very direct. This one, more formal and much more indirect. Not focusing on the fact that the writer here or the speaker here is in disagreement. Secondly, the second example I have is from something from real life. This is a sentence which a colleague of mine received by way of email. It was a student who said it was he or she was dissatisfied with the information that he or she had been given. So the student wrote, "I think the information that has been given has been incredibly poor." The problem with this sentence is that this email is that my colleague got a bit upset, so he didn't want to help the student out very much. And this is a problem in communication that sometimes we upset people without even wanting to, and that refers back to PABOK. Okay, if we want to upset people, okay, feel free to do what you like. If you don't want to upset people, perhaps you should think carefully about how you speak and write. So, one way of rewriting this and be less direct and less sort of offensive or impolite could be to say, I have not been able to find the information I needed. You see, you take away the fact that somebody has not given enough good information. It says basically the same thing. I have not been able to find the information I needed. Okay, so perhaps you should be clearer the next time. But takes the focus away from the receiver, or the fact that the receiver has done something wrong, as opposed to this one, whereas there's a clear focus on the fact that the receiver of the information has not given good information. Okay, so much for the levels of analysis. Then, no, sorry, I have one more slide. Sorry about that. We're back to PABOK. We're back to the purpose. You have to think about what you want to achieve. If you want, if you want information, think carefully about how you write to people or speak to people. So you need to think about the readers, of course. Yeah, so much for levels of analysis. I'll now go on to the concept of communicative competence. Now, the question crops up for everyone now and then, what is a good communicator? And back in the, or before 1970, language scholars were very concerned about grammar and vocabulary, the importance of having a good vocabulary and the importance of knowing how to put sentences together in a correct way. However, in the 1970s, more and more scholars became concerned with the fact that, well, yes, you need a good vocabulary and you need good syntax, good sentence structure in order to be able to communicate well. But, however, they said that this is not always enough. And one example of this could be if you go into a pub in London and you say, get me a beer, please. Or, sorry, you could just say, get me a beer. Sorry, get me a beer. Now, I've already given you the clue, but the point here is that if you go into a pub in London and say, get me a beer, the sentence will be grammatically correct and well formed. However, if you forget a word such as please, or you take this imperative from get me a beer, you may not get the beer, you may even get punched in the face. So the point is that you need more than the vocabulary and more than the grammar. You need to think about the people you're dealing with, and you need to think about the context and so on. So the concept of communicative competence developed in the 1980s. And in this presentation I have here, this is built on two American scholars called Michael Canale and Meryl Swain, two American scholars, and their European counterpart Van Eek in the 1980s and 1990s, who became very influential on the development of the concept of communicative competence in European schools and the European school systems. So what they say is that in order to have good communicative competence, you need to have grammatical competence, you need to have discourse competence, you need to have social linguistic competence, you need to have strategic competence, and you need to have socio-cultural competence and social competence. The reason why I put the last two ones in parentheses is that they were not there in the first models that were developed. So Michael Canale and Meryl Swain, they developed the four first ones here: grammatical competence, discourse competence, social linguistic competence, and strategic competence. Now, to show you what this means, go into detail on this one. Canale and Swain and Van Eek, as you can see. To go into detail on what these means, grammatical competence means good pronunciation, good vocabulary, good syntax. This is a foundation. But in addition to this, you need to know how to put these words together in a good way. So you need to have discourse competence, and discourse competence can be defined as the knowledge of the rules governing longer utterances or texts. One particular example can be the use of the word however, or moreover, or nevertheless. These are words that connect sentences together, and sentences should be connected together in a logical way. And we'll get back to this in a later lecture. Thirdly, they say you need to have social linguistic competence, which can be defined as the ability to use appropriate speech and writing styles, formal, informal, and so on, depending on the situation, such as rules of politeness, for example. And fourthly, strategic competence, the ability to find appropriate communication strategies when grammatical competence is insufficient. Finally, it mentions social linguistic and social competence, and social cultural competence. Sorry, the two last ones. Social cultural competence means a larger knowledge of cultural features in the target language. And social competence means quite simply the will and the skill to interact with people, to have social competence. Okay, so much for levels of analysis and communicative competence.